Everyone, we are live, and what a Gen Con. I had quite a Gen Con, but I think of all the Gen Cons, even though I did hang out on the Shadow Dark table during the Ennies, which is a whole other story, and that was pretty crazy. But I think probably as crazy would be these two fellows because they launched something, and it's like what's it called? It's like Cosmere, Brandon Sanderson, some Kickstarter of some sort that's up to, what's it up to? 5.1 million in one day. Pretty good. Pretty good.
Day
Not
and a half.
bad.
You don't need to exaggerate.
Okay. But we've been talking about this on the show for quite a while, because we've done a couple of shows of like all the upcoming new TTRPGs, and we have DC-20, and we have Daggerheart and everything. But I was saying of all the ones that I was most excited about was this one, by far, being a big fan of Brandon Sanderson, and just knowing that A, he loves gaming, and B, his magic systems are so cool that maybe one day we'll be talking about Sanderson systems instead of Vancian, which would be pretty cool. I would hope so. Like maybe he can invent a new system that everyone names their magics after. But too much of me talking. Who do we got here? Why don't you introduce yourselves?
I'm Andrew Fischer. I'm the lead designer on the Cosmere RPG. I've to give a brief. I don't know how much of a bio you want, but I've been in the tabletop industry for close going on 15 years now. Got my start working at Fantasy Flight Games on the Warhammer role-playing games, the Star Wars role-playing games, assorted other small projects we did. Since then, I've done a lot of board games and miniatures games and stuff, but I'm kind of coming back to tabletop role-playing games for this big Cosmere project. It's been really fun.
And hello, my name is Ross Leiser. I am a designer and writer on the core design team of the Cosmere RPG. I primarily come from the 5e side of things, but I've never really worked for a big company before this project. I was extremely independent third-party design work on the Dungeon Masters Guild, primarily specializing in player-facing materials like classes, subclasses, feats, spells, magic items, that kind of thing, and was brought onto the project primarily because I'm absolutely obsessed with the way Brandon Sanderson constructs magic systems.
Man, well, if you need some help, we're obsessed too. I'm just saying. And and Mark's designed like 100 books. You've written 120 books, something like that on the gaming. So we have a little bit of experience.
It's a lot, Stephen.
It's a lot.
Some of those books are short, so it doesn't add up to a ton.
Yeah, it's only 120. I mean, take 20 or 40 out
Only.
there, then it's only 80 or something. But if you ever want some help, I'm just saying. Anyhow,
I feel like the level 3 adventurer in the company of level 20s on this call.
So anyhow, yeah, but by the way, so everyone who's in chat, if you have any questions, feel free. And super chats are always answered first. So if you do super chat, we'll try to get to it right away. But we're actually here maybe to dive more deeply into the nitty gritty since we actually have designers here. And there's been we kind of knew what to expect. I mean, when I took a look at it, I expected a role-playing game. I expected a TTRPG. I expected a combat system with certain numbers of actions. We expected classes. We expected levels. Everything you had there. But how it was going to work was fascinating. And then obviously seeing how it is working, where I'd say, and I've heard other people describe it, it's crunchier than 5e, not quite as crunchy as Pathfinder, which is nice because right now I don't think there's anything in that space where it's not quite... It's not quite near, nothing, I think, unless you get some GURPS going, will be quite as deep as Pathfinder, Mark, because Mark, you went a little too far on it, but I love it. Very crunchy. But then, of course, I think 5e, in my opinion, is a little too light, and it doesn't have quite enough depth, but you seem to have a nice balance here. So
5e is pretty crunchy, too, on the scale of role-playing games, Steven. I would put it on the low end of the crunchy role-playing games.
I will say this one's in the middle, which I think is a good space to be in, because I don't think there's anything really in that space right now. So with that in mind, what was your goal as opposed to, were you trying to make it, very entry level? Because I even saw people saying, oh, I love Sanderson, but I've never played a TTRPG. How do you design it so that it's easy for new people to get into, but yet then people like ourselves who already know Brandon Sanderson and already play games will be able to play this and stick with it for like 20 levels, because we want depth, we want crunch, we want meaningful actions with our characters that last a long time, and not just the same old level after level.
Yeah, ultimately, we knew the game needs to handle, to your point, a really lengthy campaign, as well as we knew it needed to cover the scope of the entire Cosmere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we haven't announced that yet. We knew that from day one, and
Right.
that's a lot of different permutations we needed to cover. So we knew we needed a little bit of crunch for that. As far as where the crunch lands, I mean, we could sit here and debate that. Our lead editor, Laura, she's strongly of the opinion that we sit just south of 5e in crunchiness, but I think we could get into a whole hour-long debate about to what you guys were saying. We could get into a debate about exactly how crunchy 5e is, but anyway, we're probably, I definitely see the arguments that we're a little north of it in crunchiness. That all being said, we knew that we needed a certain amount of crunch to handle the length of the campaigns and the scope of everything we wanted to cover.
And the granularity of the magic systems that Brandon Sanderson tends to write.
And so because of all that, it was never going to be an entry-level role-playing game as far as like that. However, we did try to take a lot of steps to increase accessibility. So you'll see that in Stormlight already, and as we go into Mistborn as well, you'll see that a lot of the way the progression is set up, if you start at level 1, you kind of ease yourself into the powers, and you're not getting like access to all of the surges and everything all at once, to hopefully kind of stage that complexity for folks. And then we're also doing some other products to kind of help with onboarding, because to your point, we knew that a bunch of folks would be coming into this pretty new to role-playing games. So we have a product called The First Step that lets you kind of play through this very guided role-playing experience that actually builds your characters as you play. So you don't start with a character and like you kind of discover your character through play. This idea came directly from Brandon in one of our early meetings, and like some of his forays into playing around with different approaches to role-playing games when he was younger. And we kind of took that idea from Brandon and then kind of combined it with a couple other needs we had to make this product. And I think Sen and Merrick worked on that one, Ross.
Yeah, they were primarily responsible for that one.
And I think they've done a really good job. So, while the system itself is maybe not the most entry-level system you've ever seen, we did make a conscious effort to give a place for people to start.
And the way that Johnny O'Neill likes to describe it, and this is actually how he described it when he was on stream with Brandon last night, is that there's a lot of depth in our system between character sessions. Like when you're leveling up your character, when you're choosing what direction you want to take your character, there's a lot to dive into with the permutations of different talents you can take in our various paths, because we have fluid multipathing and the system's designed around that. But in play, there's not actually a ton of crunchiness. You only really have to worry about what's on your character sheet. And a lot of the things we designed to be a collaborative effort between the player and the GM to make sure everyone feels like they have agency.
So one way to talk about that is that there's multiple ways that your game can get crunchier. There's complexity and there's depth. And complexity is sort of a barrier to entry. It's something that you have to sort of get over to get into the game, terminology, jargon, other sort of systems like that. Whereas depth is generally more beneficial because it's more options and things that your characters can do. Usually you have to add some amount of complexity to get that depth you want. Like Andrew was saying, if it's going to do the whole Cosmere, there's some amount of the sort of bad complexity that you're going to have to add. And then it's an optimization problem of how can you add as much depth as you need while putting in as little needless complexity as possible.
By the way, I have a great quote here that someone wrote. A rules light Sanderson RPG sounds like an oxymoron. I was like, he's not wrong.
No, very accurate.
The magic systems, we're already coming in with a rules heavy IP.
Well, I can see it right now. It's like the rules for the game are 20 pages. Here's the magic system. It's 400 pages. So actually, I wanted to know, I mean, obviously, I remember I saw Andrew. We spoke last week, and you're like, "Oh, I got a surprise for you when the Kickstarter drops. You're gonna like it." And I was like, "Okay." And then I saw Cosmere RPG, and then I saw the different worlds. I was like, "That's a good surprise," because, well, from so one of the things in Roll for Comment, I talk about the business aspects quite a bit. Like that's kind of our shtick. And then when I saw that, I was like, "Okay." Now we're talking. Like, and everyone's like, "Oh, is something going to kill D&D? Is something going to kill Pathfinder?" All like, no. But then I saw that, so I'm like, well, it won't kill it, but it's definitely going to give it a run for its money.
Brandon does love a reveal.
Right, he does love a reveal. But the whole concept of, like, this is not one game, but a system and a world where you can play in the worlds that you want. And I was like, from my point of view, it's just mentally a larger game and system that you can now expand and play in so many different ways. So how will it be different, though? Like, how will Mistborn be different than the Elantris or World Hopper, or obviously, the first, the Stormlight? Is it going to be the magic systems are different? Is it the classes are different? Like, what's going to differentiate Mistborn from Stormlight exactly, if we're allowed to know?
Yeah. I mean, to start off with one of the things you said, I don't think we're not here to kill D&D, and I don't think we will, right? Like,
no.
It is, like I've worked a lot. In addition to working on RPGs, I've also worked in a bunch of card games, right? Both are segments of the industry that are very much dominated by the same company, but by these really large games, and like ultimately, I don't think we're not setting out to, and I don't think we will, like, dethrone D&D or anything, right? But like, we're hoping to offer an interesting alternative that people like will go to, and offer something that's like unique and special alongside it in the market, right? And so Ross, do you want to talk a little bit about how we've differentiated Scadrial and the Mistborn setting?
So I'm going to say what I think I'm allowed to say, and I hope I don't get in trouble with my bosses. So in general, we have a very skills-based magic system, because there's no way that we were going to be able to mechanize every single thing a person can do with a surge. So we given explicit license to be creative. And when you get to things like allomancies and feruchemies, unlike surges, they're much more specific things. Gravitation is, I can choose what direction gravity affects myself or any object I touch. And that is a very open thing. Division is, I can disintegrate basically anything I touch. And you choose how it decays as well. So that gets into the whole electrolysis and fire angle. And so that they're very wide open. But when you get to Scadrial, such as with a steel pusher, you really only have the ability to see metals around you and then push on them. If they're smaller, they go away from you. If they're larger, you go away from them. And so in general, the skill trees are going to be shorter. The talent trees in the paths are going to be generally shorter, more specialized. And generally, they're going to be a little bit faster as well, and a bit more explosive, because we want to make sure that if you can only do one thing, you want to be able to do it really well.
Yeah, I was just thinking that because, like, obviously in Mistborn, you ingest metals to cast magic, and everyone hates I'm talking about components that you use in magic, and I was like,
yes,
the entire system's based on that. So it's like, I take an action and I take one piece of metal, I take another action, I take another piece of metal, I take an action and I eat them. I'll cast my spell next turn. But it's so I imagine you have to smooth a lot of this out and actually just make everything, as you were saying, much faster for a game system. So it's not, you're not caught up in the minutia of the Sanderson magic systems, and it's more like, it feels like the system rather than going through all the methods to cast the magic.
Yeah, to like the minutia of like reloads and stuff. We already ran into that in Roshar, right? Because like, since they store the investiture there, the Stormlight in their spheres, right?
Their
You kind of have
money.
these two
Their
pools.
gems, their gems.
It's interesting. Like, money plays a part in multiple of his power systems, because in coin shots and like using coins in Mistborn also, again, but like he never really thematically explores it that much. The fact that spheres and coins are literally power. Anyway, that's a tangent. But
Let's talk about that
like,
for the next hour.
To your point, like they have spheres, they have these bags of spheres, and like
Right.
how much do you track that? Do you track every single sphere,
Right.
and like how that then gets breathed in, and then how you use that? And it's like you now have 3 different pools, all which you have to track.
Mhm.
So we ended up abstracting away the spheres in your bag a little bit, unless you are in a situation where you don't have access to a high, like if you're in Shadesmar or during the Weeping, places with a high storm wouldn't be recharging your spheres. Otherwise, it's kind of assumed, as long as you're not broke, that you
or if
have...
like an enemy stole your sphere pouch, and you can only use the spheres in the environment, that kind of
So similarly in Mistborn, at least for the common metals, the cheaper metals, you're going to readily have vials available until somebody disarms you of them. A very common thing is getting all your vials pushed off of you by like a coin shot or something. And so like you can be deprived of them, but it's a very binary thing instead of being this fiddly, like I have X number of vials on me or whatever else.
Right.
To Ross's, to like a broader kind of systemic look at the different planets, we are going to use all of the fundamentals underlying the system are the same. It's really important to us that these be fully compatible with each other. And like some game systems like claim compatibility, and like game systems I have worked on, like our the Warhammer 40,000 RPGs were compatible, but you had to do some like stretching and bending to really make it work. But then like over to the Star Wars role-playing games that I worked on at Fantasy Flight, we really made an effort to make sure that they used all the fundamental underlying systems, and it was basically plug and play, and that like you could pick up the 2 books and they just went together completely seamlessly. And so that is the same goal here, is that we don't want it. You're not going to be bending or twisting these games to get them to all work together. Ideally, you should just be able to open them up, and it's intuitive how player options between the 2 are compatible and how they are like they can work together for a character who uses both. And so as far as how things are different, first, there's a lot of things that are the same. All the underlying mechanics are the same. And to Ross's point, some of that content, that player content, will be shaped a little differently, right? Instead of these big, expansive, radiant trees, you have little trees that represent the different metals, right? And like a Misting might only have like their 1 tree, and then they have a lot of heroic talents to supplement it, whereas like a Mistborn has a bunch and has to kind of spread out. But we use that. So the shape of the exact content you're interfacing with will be different, and then the really nitty gritty of how it interacts with the different power sources and like to Ross's point, like how they actually interact with physics and stuff changes a lot. But a lot of the fun.
Sorry,
go ahead, Ross. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in Mistborn Era 2 especially, we see even Allomancers and Feruchemists rely a lot more on their mundane skill set as well than we typically see people on Roshar. So that's kind of built into the way we're expressing it in our system, where we expect people with these powers to have more heroic, non-magical talents on their character than maybe a Surge Binder on Roshar might.
So there's a super chat for 50 Danish krona, which you may have already answered, Andrew. Someone they were saying, since you worked on Star Wars Edge of the Empire, they were wondering, will the settings have more or less difference than the ones between Edge of the Empire and the other ones?
FAD
probably,
and AOR, whatever that is. I don't even know what those are.
Age of Rebellion and Force and Destiny.
Oh, of course.
They're going to be a little, definitely more than Edge and Age were very similar, right? They like, you had slightly more military classes in Age of Rebellion, but like generally, or careers in Age of Rebellion, but generally they're very similar. It's probably more akin to the difference between like Edge and Force and Destiny, where you're going like one is like Jedi and the other one is more smugglers, and so it's probably going to be that amount of difference instead of like the amounts of difference between Edge and Age.
So I wanted to ask from a larger point of view. I know we're like getting ahead of ourselves, but so this is interesting because you're writing an RPG based on books that are still being written, especially Stormlight, because that's supposed to be a 10-book series, and he is only coming out with book 5, later this year. So he's still got a way to go, and things are still being discovered, and secrets are coming out. And how are you going to handle that? Did he give you like the tome, the Bible, of like everything that's going to happen, and you can slowly get that out? Are you working directly with him, or are you just sort of like, as he reveals more of his world, then you'll put it into your game? I'm just curious. The same thing is with Mistborn, because I know there's going to be another
There were 3.
another trilogy coming out. So obviously you did the 2 things. You're like, yeah, we're doing Stormlight and Mistborn, and neither are complete, but here's the game.
To be fair, neither is Elantris. He's announced 2 more books in that
right.
world that are coming.
Well, I guess he's turning. He's I think Wheel of Time, maybe he got the bug. It's like, you know what? I think we can just keep writing more books, and we'll just never finish
I mean,
them.
at least, like, I have faith in Sanderson to deliver, right? Like,
well, you know what? He's young, and he writes fast, so...
Yeah, exactly.
So basically,
yes,
how are you going to handle, the books continuously moving forward with new revelations and magic, and you keeping up with that?
Yeah, so I mean, Brandon says in his videos that he wants this RPG to continue to be supported as he writes books into the future. Mm-hmm. Our timing here actually turned out pretty good, because while he does plan on 10 Stormlight books, he's specifically not calling them eras. My guess is this is not based on any kind of inside knowledge. This is just my guess. My guess is that's just because there's going to be less of a time skip between the 2 halves of Stormlight.
You don't even have to guess there, Fisher. He said that on stream last night.
Yeah.
Okay, did he? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, books 1 through 5 are now like the first era, and then 6 through 10 are the next era. So,
so it's not going to be like a 300-year time gap.
Okay. That's
so
good.
Because it's this 5-book arc, and he has completed it, this is a great time to drop a thing in the setting, right? We have this arc complete, and we can do these books that fully encapsulates this. Like, speaking as somebody who was making a Star Wars RPG while they blew up canon, there are better and worse times to make a game in the setting, and this is pretty much one of the best times, because we can know that this book encapsulates all 5 of the first novels, because while book 5 isn't out yet, we've been working really closely with Brandon, so we had all the information we need to make sure that it covers those first 5 books. So there we're pretty clean. Mistborn, we're mainly going to be covering eras 1 and 2. And then when he gets to era 3 of Mistborn, and then someday when he gets to era 2 or arc 2 of Stormlight, we'll probably make some kind of supplement that can handle a lot of that stuff. And you'll see some places where that's we're clearly going to be kind of exploring that space. For example, in our Radiant orders, each Radiant order has 5 ideals, but you can only play up through 4 in the core book. And that's just because, like, some things need to be saved for Brandon's story. need to be saved for the novels, and also just don't make sense in the time period we're exploring. And so we got a bunch of stuff that a bunch of things that Brandon hasn't been able to show on screen as much, things like the tension surge and the transportation surge, that we're able to explore more in depth. But there's some elements that the books have to get there before we'll explore next.
And I will say that our world guide, he supplied us a lot of information about places in the world that we'll get to explore, places that have not appeared on screen very much, if at all, in the world guide, because he gave us information on that for us to use, including we have all 9 brands of fuse in our adversaries section, because he gave us information about the missing 2 to include. All
right, I'm gonna ask you the geekiest question, Paul. Are you ready?
That's a high bar.
How does wit show up in these books?
Oh, Hoyd.
Or Hoyd, either one.
Wit doesn't show up that much. If you're hoping for a wit profile right off the bat, we don't have one for you. I think that might take more spreads than we're willing to dedicate.
And you're gonna have to probably wait until the World Hopper RPG, when we finally can get to Yolish light weaving as a power system.
That guy would have a lot of rules in his profile.
I mean, the man just goes around the Cosmere collecting magic systems for all intents and purposes.
But I will say, I won't get into a lot of detailed spoilers, but our Stonewalker adventure Brandon and Dan planned out and outlined that entire plot line for us, and it hits it tells a story that bridges a gap between book 4 and 5 that otherwise Brandon didn't have a place to tell, and he lets us play with a lot of toys in that adventure. I've worked with a lot of licensors over the years, and like often when you're working with licensors, it's very much like, all right, how do I work with it to stay within your defined walls? How do I make sure I only cover things that have already been defined by your story team or whatever, right? Like, so I approached this project in the same way. You know, when we went to go sit down with Brandon, I like had my plan out for like, okay, let's set all the walls, all the invisible walls, so we make sure we know where we can play. And Brandon just starts going, oh, well, you should give them this. You should let them play with this thing. They should meet this character. And so Brandon has been in like, and that's not to throw shade at any other licensor, right? Like they're managing these giant IPs, but like Brandon, he's so excited about the RPG and like about giving people these toys. So I will tell you that like you get to meet a lot of big characters, use a lot of do a lot of iconic things, use iconic items in the Stonewalkers adventure. We definitely got to put a lot of toys from the setting in there.
But even in our Stormlight handbook, I was shocked at how much information he was willing to give us, like such as certain capital W words, for example, he let us play with in the Radiance chapter. And so that was a real pleasure.
So, talking about Stonewalkers, so tell us a little bit more about this adventure. You know, of everything I saw, that was what I was most excited about, because I was like, okay, I like, you know, because a lot of times you'll come with these adventures and it'll be like a 1 or 2, you know, level, but I was like, okay, it's like level 1 through 7, 6 chapters, tells an actual story, you know, co-written by Brandon. So it's like, wow, it's like you get to play a book, and it sounds like it's kind of meaty. So, like, tell us what you can about that one.
That's a tricky one too, right? Because like that's where we get into spoiler territory.
Well, we might be able to talk a little bit about City That Smolders, because that was demoed to the public.
Yeah, we did demo that one.
That was an excerpt from this large campaign adventure book that we condensed down to a 4-hour session for Gen Con.
Like you said, it's levels 1 through 7 ish. And so it's going to, we've kind of divided the levels into tiers and honestly, like with Stormlight, they kind of nicely map to the books. So tier 1, the first 5 levels mapped pretty closely to Way of Kings. And like so on past that, every 5 levels kind of maps to a book. So what you kind of see your main characters like Shallan and Kaladin doing in those books is probably what about the power level you can expect to be during that tier. So this takes you kind of through that first tier of like discovering your powers and into tier 2 of if you decide to be a Radiant. You don't need to be a Radiant. You can pull an Adolin and stay in our heroic trees your entire time. But if you decide to be a Radiant, you'll be kind of come into your powers and be able to upgrade them and be using them and throwing them around by the end of this adventure. And, using some of the powerful items you might see people using by book 2. So this follows that same that kind of that's kind of the arc of power you can expect in this story. Like I said, so time period wise, it actually starts pretty early on in the books and plays alongside the events of the book, but eventually kind of bridges a gap from earlier in the books to something that is the case in book 5 that like you'll be able to see. As you're reading book 5, you'll be able to see the effects on the world that your party had, assuming you actually stick to the plot by the end.
You can never account for player actions, but everything the NPCs do is canon.
So, what level does the RPG go up to? Is it level 10 or level 20?
Well, so it's uncapped. You can go as high as you want, but like roughly as we're talking these tiers of play, the 20 level arc is roughly what you can expect. We let you continue leveling from there, and you can still like add new stuff to your character, but it kind of tapers off there. Kind of past level 20 is when we, that's tier 5. And that's, you start getting into like world hopper power levels, right? Herald level play. And so like, because of that, the handbook, that kind of goes beyond exactly the scope of the handbook support. So like one day, you know, when you have your world hopper who's tier 5 and, you know, mashes together combat systems from multiple of these books, we'll have supplements for you. But right now on Roshar, you're probably going to be playing between level 1 and 20.
And that's probably the level you'd expect to be playing Hoyd at. Yeah. Is that level 21 plus?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, Hoyd is
thousands of years old.
So how is it going to actually work? This is like, I don't know if you're ready to discuss this. So I wasn't sure how it worked with Star Wars, but you know, one of the disadvantages of coming up with worlds like this that are so tightly tied is that you have to come out, you being the publishers have to almost come out with everything, including the rules, including the adventures, including the systems. Is it going to be third-party support for adventures and other aspects, or is it something that you guys really going to have to kind of control, or how do you expect that to work?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we can't, like, you know, this is Brandon's setting, right? This is all Dragonsteel's property, so like we can't give permission for people to publish and sell works based on Brandon's books, right? That's just not within our scope. But that being said, like, we do really like open license gaming and giving people those tools. And so, you know, Brotherwise is interested in taking this system and making a kind of open license version of it for people who want to use it for other things. But we aren't going to be able to like necessarily support and endorse selling things set in Brandon's IP, you know?
Yeah, so we don't know where exactly this is going to go, but I know that that Johnny in particular is talking to Dragonsteel about updating fan content policy from Dragonsteel to maybe allow people to not sell, but like put out their own homebrews for Roshar and such. We don't know where that's going to land yet, but I know that's kind of what's in the works.
Okay. So I saw a lot of people. Oh, by the way, I got my Stormlight dice right here. Look at that.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
yes.
I like the. Well, you know what? I was like, I'm pretty picky with dice, but these looked very much like. I presume you did that on purpose, kind of like the Stormlight gens. Yeah, I was like, because when you see them in the right angle, it's like they kind of glow. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, leave them outside when there's a storm and see if they start going.
No, that would be,
I'm not sure if you saw.
I know, hold them up. Do they have metal in them? That'd be like, oh, look.
Not sure if you saw, but in the Kickstarter update that that Brotherwise released yesterday, we revealed that one of the stretch goals that was unlocked was a Lifelight plot die, which is going to be in a similar style, but like green.
Oh.
So, and there's also a liquid core dice that look unbelievably incredible in person. I got to see a prototype at Gen Con, and they are so gorgeous.
So, a lot of people have been actually talking about the magic system because it's like, all right, it's not 2 action, but it's not 3 action, and it's something in between. And I wasn't sure.
You mean the action economy?
Yeah, the action economy system.
Oh, it's Shadows of the Demon Lord.
Yeah, yeah, I guess, but not as many people are familiar with that. So,
I thought more people were going to reference that, like when we used kind of a similar system. But like, actually, you're one of the first ones, so I appreciate you mentioning that one.
I think Mark's the first one. Maybe
I'm
you and
sure
Derek.
Other people have referenced that it's Shadows of the Demon Lord because, like, I mean, okay, it's a little bit niche, but it's still a pretty popular RPG.
But I mean, again, it's like it's so hard to come up with these systems. But do you feel like, I mean, obviously you've been playtesting it for years. How does it work in practice? Because it seems like a lot of bookkeeping. It's like, okay, wait, I'm going to go first. Now I'm going to go last. Now I'm going to go here. I'm going to go there. It's like, or does it go a little smoother in practice?
Yeah, like, I mean, one of our big intentions was to make initiative an interesting decision and then make it dynamic and easy. So
it's way simpler in practice than it reads.
Okay.
Yeah, we wanted to remove bookkeeping because I find that rolling for initiative is just a royal pain in the ass, right? Like
you have to roll for it, you have to write it, you have to track it.
Yeah, like it's, there's whole tools for doing all of this. In Star Wars, we kind of did a in between where you kind of rolled for these slots and then anybody could use the slots. but we wanted something that felt just kind of dynamic and quick at the table. So one of the big factors of this is you don't need to decide right at the beginning of the round if you're taking a fast or slow turn. Nobody needs to remember if you've taken a fast or slow turn. So you just pass at the start of the combat, you pass it over to the players as the GM. And
Who wants a fast turn?
Who wants to take a fast turn? Players can act in any order, and players can decide to take a fast turn in any order. And so at the table, it's just a matter of feeling and deciding in the moment that you want to act now before enemies, or you want to save it. So the only tracking there is have you acted this round or not, which is very easy to track. Mm-hmm. And so then once everybody has decided, all right, I'm good, no more fast turns, right? Then they pass it back to you as the GM. You have any NPCs you want to act fast, go fast. Then you pass it back to the players, and the remaining slow turn players go in any order they choose. And so as a result, there's very little tracking at all besides have you gone this round.
And the way I described it to players just was, you can go fast. You're only going to get 2 actions, but you'll be able to act before the enemies have a chance to potentially fool your plans. Or you can take the risk of enemies getting in your way and get the additional action economy. And when I explained it to people like that, it really clicked. Why you would want to take a fast turn, why you'd want to take a slow. And we saw a lot of dynamic decision-making from people who had never played the system right off the bat.
I think it's a really cool action economy overall, and it does simplify a lot of things. I'd say that there's probably one more trade-off than what you mentioned that you have to do, which is everything has to go in strict rounds, and you can't just kind of go round robin, and durations that are measured in rounds instead of the end of your next turn do require you to remember whether you took a fast turn or a slow turn, and you have to have a notepad or something somewhere where you keep track of all 4 of those. But it's probably worth it in a big fight compared to having to roll that many initiatives.
Yeah, that's a good point. So durations, so there's a couple different, and then there's a couple other foibles as well, right? Like enemies acting before players is an interesting design space, and it's just gone from the system, right? Like we can have enemies be surprised or the players be surprised, and that forces them to go slow. So we have this condition that kind of gets around it. And then admittedly,
some enemies cheat.
And yeah, there's some enemies that cheat, that do things at the start of combat, and kind of like break the rules in a way the players can't, to kind of get the jump on you a little bit. But so there are a few foibles, but the duration foible is another interesting thing about the system. We actually, almost every single duration of the game lasts until the start of your next turn, or the start of so many turns. Awesome. So that there's a slight weirdness there because it gives you a little control.
Yeah. So if you use that ability on a fast turn, you can actually extend its duration by taking a slow turn next round. Exactly.
If you're in a Shadow of the Demon Lord type situation, you often want to have a buffer, especially a defensive buffer, or someone who debuffs the enemy's offense if the duration is based on your own turn. Go fast, then slow, so that they can debuff on 2 turns, while having most people go slow if you don't care if the enemies get to do their turn first, so that they can potentially take a second turn before anything goes if they go fast on the next turn. And I consider that to be a benefit. It's a cool tactical thing, yes, rather than a foible. Whereas I consider if it's done in rounds and not beginning of your turn, to be a foible. And I didn't have access to any of the actual durations of anything, but in the core rules it does mention both of these as being types of durations.
Yeah. And so you're right. It can be kind of neat if you have control over it, but it's a very gamey control, right? Which is not as I find very top down mechanics. So very narrative mechanics, more accessible to new players, right? It's very much like, okay, so this fiddly rule interaction, technically based on this initiative choice, you can optimize this. That new player who just wants to tell their story, kind of just stares at you, what? And so because of that, it's definitely kind of that more advanced, very gamey tactics. But some people love it.
Yeah, I had a player figure that out live during one of our 1-hour combat demos and feel like an absolute genius. And that was just good gameplay. It created a good moment for everybody at the table, and so I don't consider that disadvantage at all.
So I'm gonna ask you. You ready for a tough question? I'm gonna ask you a tough question.
All right.
Well, someone actually wrote this, and I'm gonna paraphrase. And they basically wrote, it says the Kickstarter should do great numbers, but how much of that will be Sanderson's collectors outside the RPG hobby? And what are your plans for leveraging the Kickstarter to a sustainable and growing player network? And to truth be told, like, I'm not throwing shade at Avatar, but Avatar, had did like 10 million, and then I go to conventions and no one's playing it. It just sort of came and went, it disappeared. I imagine Sanderson and the fact that just the game itself and the magic system, and that he's still actively writing books, I don't think will ever disappear. But how do you keep this momentum up and keep it sustainable so that you can continuously grow and expand the game without, being like a really big Kickstarter and then you don't hear from it ever again?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're on the game design team, so we can't, we're not sitting here about product strategy, though. I mean, like, obviously we have some sense of it. One of the big benefits here is just, you can see just from the Kickstarter campaign, the plans to continue to support and release many games across many settings.
And Avatar didn't get a lot of that. Like, I think they had one expansion that came out after their Kickstarter finally fulfilled, and then it just kind of disappeared.
And so those ongoing releases, are definitely going to kind of help keep the game in consciousness and pull in new and different players from the different parts of the setting. Because, I mean, obviously Stormlight and Mistborn are the two big ones, but the different settings appeal to different people. Additionally, I'm not hyper worried about the ratio of collectors to players, if for no other reason than the closed beta test we did before. So we started a closed beta a little ahead of the campaign, and the interest we got in playing and actually playing the system is
more than 3,000 people signed up to join that. Arrived in that closed plate. I think 10,000 signed up, and I think 3,000 actually joined the server.
It's been a little staggering, the amount of people playing the game, giving us feedback on the game. Processing all the feedback has been the biggest challenge. And so based on that kind of interest, obviously there's a lot of people who just kind of want to see it, but based on the engagement we're getting still from people playing the game, checking out the game, doing different builds and everything, I'm not worried about a solid installed base of people who actually care about the game and the system. And to be honest, that's one of the reasons we set up the game line like we did, is the collectors the collectors will buy a little bit of everything, but there are specific books for people who are mainly here for the lore, for the world guides give them this the kind of the lore book, the coffee table book, the Sanderson guide, where the handbook gives you kind of the rules and everything. So we've kind of set it up for basically players and collectors to engage on different levels based on how they want to engage with it.
And I can't really speak for anybody else in the team, but I know that I personally have received a lot of private messages and emails from YouTubers and podcasters, even though I'm relatively small potatoes on the team, even though I'm on the core design team. I'm definitely not a lead. But from YouTubers and podcasters, I've received a whole bunch of requests of hey, can we play this on stream? Or can we record a podcast of this and put it up? Just because I think between the Best of Gen Con 2024 award we got over the weekend and the surprising success of the Kickstarter since it launched yesterday morning, I think we're getting a lot of attention from people that kind of wrote us off initially as being relatively niche to the fan base, but now are kind of interested in what we have going on with our system and mechanics.
That's a good point, Ross, to engaging with the community, building a community, releasing content to that community, supporting that community, and supporting streamers and other content creators who want to use the game. I think that will also help, hopefully.
Yeah, actual plays have driven a ton of D&D success in the past 10 or so years. Critical Role, Dimension 20, those have really kept D&D in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, it's actually it's a combination of Stranger Things and Critical Role, and then obviously, and then just being in the zeitgeist it's like in the top 100 known properties worldwide, which it's its own thing. And you guys already kind of have one and a half of those, because it's like Sanderson is coming out with products and will continue to do so. So he can promote the game forever. As his books become more and more popular, he's becoming more into the public zeitgeist of, at least it's not even a specific book, which is interesting, because as I saw you call it Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere role-playing game, and then it becomes almost like Stephen King's World of Horror. It's like it becomes more of a brand than just a specific, oh, you're playing Stormlight, or oh, you're playing Mistborn. So from a business point of view, that's very smart. So really it's the last part, which is the community aspect. Then I feel like, yeah, as long as you do that one well and you run games at shows, both officially and unofficially, and then you have adventures that come out, or you come out with small adventures that are run at shows that people can see early, that you'll be able to keep it alive. And that's how, Pathfinder was able to really, grow its success in Starfinder, and now Shadow Dark as well, because it's like everywhere I go, people are running Shadow Dark. It's just everywhere, because the community is just gargantuan. So, I
So
think,
we even got.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
What were you saying, Mark?
Oh no, go ahead first, Russ.
I was going to say that we had even High Rollers, our digital marketing team, worked with them to get them to release an actual play of our system just yesterday.
Awesome. So I was going to say, you asked a lot of business questions, Stephen, but shall I ask at least one game design question?
Go right ahead. I've been monopolizing it. Well, because I'm not even asking tough ones. I'm just doing the scratch the surface.
It's not hardball or anything,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to. So I'm first to say I really like the attributes in the system, and the way that they're spread out, and they all have something cool that they're doing. But I wanted to specifically ask about one of the things that I saw that I didn't grok as much as the rest of the document. That's possibly because I didn't read it well enough, which was on senses and primary senses that aren't vision. It looks like to me that I can ask my GM if my primary sense is intuition, one of the ones that is listed in the book. And the book says that vision is not different or special compared to the other senses. And so that if I had zero perception, I picked intuition, then if it was dark, if there was a high storm, if anything was going on, I could just perceive kind of anything unless my intuition was blocked by some kind of intuition blocking ability. But then after that, assuming I'm not a character with a disability or anything else like that, I'm just a normal human who's based on intuition, I would not be able to see anything beyond the range of 5 feet if my intuition was blocked by magic. Is that right? Or did I do something off that was there?
Yeah. So for how we're handling senses, we wanted to kind of open up senses to beyond just vision being this central, kind of the default, right? And so we wanted to open up, like, especially across the variety of different characters we see in the Cosmere and how all these different characters interface with the world. We wanted something that like kind of operated on the same basis and felt intuitive and parallel to people, no matter how their character is kind of interfacing with the world, but gave you kind of control over it. So most people will probably use vision. Some people may use hearing, but yes, some players may use something different than that. And we wanted it to kind of operate on this same structure of, perception, scales, how far your senses can reach unless they are obscured by something. And you are right. Like, yes, you can potentially based on your character, you might have senses that are obscured less often than other characters' senses. But, I think GMs can often adapt to the types of senses their players are using. You'll see in our adventures, we offer recommendations for different times, different senses may be obscured by different things. And so, the GM is likely to throw different challenges at you based on the primary senses of the different characters in the party. And so, it can be a benefit sometimes when the types of senses you're using wouldn't be obscured by the darkness your party is in, but it can be a huge detriment a lot of other times. And so it's always a trade-off, right? If you're talking purely tactically and not like from a storytelling standpoint, there's always a trade-off in those different decisions of how you approach it. But you're right, it is a little more flexible and a little more narrative on exactly what you say your character's primary senses, because we wanted to give people the ability to choose for their character.
And touch is one of the choices. Is that supposed to be like a ability to feel vibrations in the air out to a high distance, or is it like touch? Because
I mean, just go full Toph. Getting back to Avatar Legends, just go full Toph.
Yeah,
so it is tremor sense and vibrations. That's what I was imagining when I saw it. I was like, well, this allows me supposedly to see all the way out, but it just said touch. So I was like, if it's only touch, then my reach is going to matter a lot too.
Is it using the Force? Can we go there?
Well, I mean, like that stone ward is that stone ward, the Toph stone ward that can feel through the ground. Certainly a potential. I think for any of this, right, you have to talk to your GM and like have a rational and reasonable explanation of how your character functions, right? These decisions are not there just as like a blanket permission that you can like use touch to just automatically sense everything around you, right? Like this is a tool for players who do want to play with a character like that. You still got to talk to your GM and get them to agree on some common sense ways that this interacts with the story, right? Like this is role-playing games are a conversation. And so this is a place where you're going to have that conversation.
Yeah. And that's getting back to kind of that more narrative element. Our game is very focused on that. Like we do have a lot of mechanical things, but we have and some major crunch, but all of that is designed to serve the narrative and to create really epic moments at the table. Like especially the way we designed the way the ideals work. Like we want you to be able to have those big epic moments where you swear your ideal in the middle of the scene, go Super Saiyan and dominate. Like you see, for example, Kaladin do in the books. We have a big focus on making sure that crunch serves the story.
That makes sense. And then my other one, very minor question this time. That last one was more of a philosophical one on that particular game design element. If you have more than one thing that forces you to roll a plot die and then specifies the exact complication that you have to use if you hit a complication, do you get them both? Does the GM pick one of the two required complications, or what should you do?
So you always roll a maximum of one plot die. You can give advantage or disadvantage to that plot die roll, yes. And so you technically roll two and then choose either better or worse. Technically, player chooses or GM chooses based on advantage or complication.
So on disadvantage, the GM can choose to give you a better die roll.
No, I get that. I'm just saying I only have one die. I rolled it. I got a complication, and two different rules, such as the ranged attack against it when an ally is next to them, both state what the complication must be. Mm-hmm. Does that mean the GM picks between the mandatory complications, or do you actually get them all?
Yeah, the GM chooses, and then additionally, in the reverse, if you had two, there's fewer mandatory opportunity spends, but if you had like two mandatory opportunity spends, the player chooses instead.
You have one opportunity, you choose how to spend it. Now, if you also rolled a natural one and generated complication on your D20, then you'd get both.
So is it possible to get 3 opportunities or complications on the same roll? Because I think it is.
I believe it is. So you could get one from your plot die, one from the D20. So let's say opportunity, right? You roll opportunity on the plot die, you roll a 20. For those of you who don't know, in our system, a natural 1 generates a complication and a natural 20 generates an opportunity. It's kind of how we handle critical success and failure. So you get those two. And then there are certain effects, talents,
like the determined condition
that can grant. Yeah, that one requires you to fail those.
If you roll a natural 20,
I think you can get 3. I think you can get 3 without any special effects, because I did not have access to the special effects due to a very weird application of multi-target attacking, using what Ross mentioned about the GM possibly giving you the benefit. So if you roll a 20 on your attack roll against 2 targets, one of which you have advantage against and one of which you have disadvantage against, and then on your plot die, you rolled a complication with a +4 on one and an opportunity on the other, and you took the opportunity because why would I want a +4 when I rolled a 20? But then you had double disadvantage against the other one. Your second die after the 20 was 4 below what you needed to succeed, and you again had a opportunity versus a complication with the +4, and the GM's like, well, I don't want you to succeed, so I'm gonna give you the opportunity instead of the +4. I think, would that give you 3, or would that just be like, well, you can only get 1 from the plot die, even if it's multiple plot die that the GM is giving 1 of and you were giving the other of?
You could still only get 2 out of that instance because advantage and disadvantage ultimately just have you roll 2 of the dice and then 1 gets chosen as the result, right? So at the end of the day, you're still only rolling 1 d20 and 1 plot die. Like,
you just apply the result of the d20 plus bonuses to the characters in those various ways.
Okay, so the GM can actually give you the opportunity with no cost to themselves if you've already taken the opportunity on another opponent in the multi-target attack.
So you're not rolling multiple attacks. You're rolling one.
No, you rolled 1, but the rules say that if some enemies you have advantage and some have disadvantage, then you roll once first. And then you roll all your advantage dice separately and all your disadvantage dice separately on the other targets. And so you would have gotten the opportunity on the separate sets. You would have gotten it on the advantage set and the disadvantage set.
No, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's a fairly niche interaction.
Yes, that's why I asked it last, just for fun.
Mark's just trying to figure out how to kill his players, that's all.
But yes, okay, so in that instance, you could potentially have an opportunity that was interacting, because it's like technically from a different die.
Right.
Yes, so like you could theoretically apply an opportunity to one target and another target. So yes, in that case, you could potentially end up with 3 opportunity.
Yeah, that's so unbelievably niche. I just let him have it.
The much more likely way you might end up with 3 opportunities is there's some talents that can give you one, and so you'd roll it on both your dice and use a talent. So there are these times when you can trigger a few different ones, but there's a pretty big menu of different things you can spend it on, and also there's just the open-ended and the honestly most often used, like, you can use the opportunity to have good things happen in the story. And, when folks do get a couple opportunities, they often just kind of ask the GM, hey, can I
have one big one?
Yeah, can I have one big effect? So that's usually what happens when somebody triggers a few different opportunities like that.
That happened to me twice in a single day of demos on the very first day of Gen Con. I had 2 people roll double opportunities in separate sessions of combat demos, and both of them were very fun.
Yeah, you see, you guys are like, oh, that's an edge case, except it happens all the time.
Well, no, the edge case was getting 3 because you got 1 from disadvantage that the GM chose to give you.
Dude, I'm in software for a living. Edge cases is my, livelihood, okay? That's
on the edge.
It's like, oh, that's an edge case. I'm like, yeah, it happens all the time.
Maybe you should be an edge dancer. Sounds like you're very familiar with the
if I could, I'd give you a hero point. That was very good.
Fisher can attest. I never missed the opportunity for a good Cosmere pun.
Yeah, you're being way too nice to him. In the design meeting, we just groaned at him.
That's too mean.
That feeds me. It feeds me.
So, by the way, I'm just going to answer this because it's coming up like 10 times in the chat. Is there a despair triumph system like Star Wars? People be keeping asking if it's similar.
Yeah, and that's kind of these opportunities and complications we're talking about. Yeah. That's basically what they are. They're not quite despair and triumph in Star Wars are very much like critical success and critical failure. They're these big effects. These are more equivalent to in the Star Wars system like advantage and what are they? Is it advantage and threat? I think. Because I've worked on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Star Wars, Genesis, so they all have these different names, but basically they're kind of in between that, where there's one is this good narrative effect and the other one's this bad narrative effect, and we give some mechanical triggers. There's some mechanical hooks that can key off of them, but otherwise they can be spent to have different side effects, narrative side effects come out from your test. So yes, they're very kind of equivalent to advantage or triumph or threat and despair in Star Wars.
So I do have, it's not a game design question, a little bit of business, little game design. There's not a lot of monsters in his games. I mean, there's some, but how are you going to handle that? I guess there was kind of a similar issue in Star Wars, but really, games kind of live and die on the antagonists and monsters. And how are you gonna? Are you just gonna have new ones invented for the game, or are I'm just not exactly sure how that's gonna work? Or is you mostly gonna be fighting NPCs and other player type characters or humanoids?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, there's plenty of adversaries in these books, but yeah, to your point, a lot more humanoid. You'll notice in the rules we don't use like creature like D&D or other games do. We use character to refer to all the entities in the game, and that's because like
most of the enemies are humanoid.
Yeah.
We have a couple real deep cuts for like the beasts, like certain things that were mentioned on literally one page of the books and then never again. We like to talk about the Kornak. We have art, the very first ever official art, and a stat block for the Kornak.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you're making them NPCs, or sorry, if you're making them humanoids, one of the big issues that happened in early versions of D&D is that they become loot pinatas, because then you kill them and then you literally can take all their loot and then start using it, and it becomes like this endless cycle of, you getting stronger and stronger. The nice advantage of monsters is that you can continuously defeat them and never get anything from them other than experience, maybe some treasure. So...
Well, ultimately, I mean, the setting answers that for us. Is like the Cosmere just isn't the like. There are magical items, but they are all incredibly rare, special treasures, right? Like looking at Roshar, there's Fabrials and Shard Blades, and these are priceless artifacts. You're not killing people and looting their +2 sword and their slightly better armor to get these incremental upgrades. Generally, there's some expensive stuff in the setting that your character might not start with, but beyond, once you're somewhat well equipped, the game just isn't about grinding enemies for loot. You don't want the rusty sword of that person that you just killed, because your weapon that you have an expertise in and know how to use is going to be a lot better for you. So that leaves you without like one of the big reward loops from a game like Dungeons and Dragons, right? And one of the places we kind of supplement that is we look to, because we're looking for ways to represent other parts of the setting in the game. And a big one is the Cosmere is a lot about kind of introspection and character growth, right? Like, how do you gamify all of the, like, Kaladin sitting there thinking about his feelings and his relationship to his father or whatever. And so we have this system called goals, and you kind of set these goals for your character, and we give a bunch of different examples and everything, but ultimately it's kind of a creative exercise between you and your GM. And you set these goals for your character and then check off progress next to them as you make demonstrable progress towards these goals. And once you've checked off a certain amount of progress, you gain rewards. And rewards could be anything from, like, say your goal was to win a shard blade in a duel, right? So that reward could end up being a shard blade, very loot-like, but it could be something like earning the trust of a powerful character we have, and them becoming a patron of yours, where they are kind of helping you and providing you bonuses, a la some of the characters in One Ring. And we have a bunch of example patrons of all the big characters from the books. And it could be getting a companion who follows you around, like a companion NPC. And so,
such as a squire or maybe an axe hound that you nursed back to health, and now it fights alongside you.
This goals and reward system is also how we handle swearing ideals and gaining your powers as a radiant. And so this system kind of fills the gap that's left by there not being as much of a kind of loot cycle as there is in Dungeons and Dragons. And this mostly came out of the necessity of like just what the setting is like, but there is the side benefit of we don't have that loot feedback loop like you mentioned. Mostly by accident.
I mean, our system doesn't use experience either. We very much have that milestone leveling, because we don't really see murder hobos on Roshar. Like the main characters don't go around and just kill people for fun, typically.
Unless the thrill has taken over.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I know. That's what these
there
are.
might be some examples.
You're playing with players,
there are
though.
some examples, but it's not necessarily a play pattern that we want to encourage.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know about that, but it's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of fanfic coming out of these games, unfortunately. So
Maybe fortunately, if it's not bad fanfic, I guess. Like
Yeah.
means
Yeah,
they're
we'll
experiencing
see.
the world.
yeah, that's true. That's true. So obviously the Kickstarter's doing. I like how you're like, oh, we didn't expect it to do this well. Oh, come on, you expected it to do well. It was like
Well,
one
I
of the
mean-
most followed Kickstarters in history. So
Yeah, I mean, like, but we were Brotherwise was already. I mean, to put it very practically, Brotherwise was already spending a lot of money on making this game before we had a follower count, right?
Mhm.
that's
And, like,
true.
And like obviously Brandon has like so many people love his books, and so we knew a lot of people were going to come to this game.
Mhm.
But between the secret projects and the Words of Radiance Leatherbound and all these other projects he's doing, you're like, you never know exactly how a project's going to go. And we launched it at a slightly unusual time, directly after Gen Con and everything else. And so, like, you have hopes, obviously, and I'm sure that the Brotherwise guys have like plans and like places they need to hit to make these games successful or whatever. But I think there was also like we were talking about it at Gen Con and like making guesses, right? And like there was definitely a little air of like superstition where it's like,
Don't say a number. Don't do it.
Like if I guess it's gonna jinx us.
I mean, because also we didn't know, like, we know that Sanderson has an enormous following. Like, Sander fans, like, they're a very like fanatical fan base in terms of like how much they want to support his stuff. But we also didn't know how much of that would be conversion from book fans to tabletop role-playing game fans. So we didn't know what that number was within the community. So it's hard to guess that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But at least you had experience from Star Wars, which probably gave you a bit of an idea, because it's not exactly the same, but it's probably as close as you can get between two big fandoms.
There's some analogy there, though. For Star Wars, we were selling through distribution, right? Like, which is ultimately a different beast than crowdfunding a game. And like there are comparisons, but like your customer. I mean, well, like, as developers and designers, we're making the game for the players at the end of the day. When you're selling it to distribution, like from a business standpoint, your customers are distributors, right? Like, and so it's like, it's a bit of a, like, it's slightly apples and oranges. But I could get it. Yeah. You can get a sense of scope at the very least.
So actually, I know you guys have to go soon, but I do have a follow-up, which is, you did a very long play test, which I applaud, because we at Roll for Combat do very long play tests as well to try to make sure our games are as bulletproof as possible. And for those of you who aren't out there and don't know, like, if anything that made me feel like this game will probably be very good out of the gate, it's just doing that. Because people assume that, like, oh, yeah, I used to have these arguments all the time. It's like whenever we play like a D&D module or even a Pathfinder adventure module, be like, oh, they play tested this. Of course it's going to work out well. And I'm like, did they play test? And I asked them, they're like, no, of course not. Like, they don't have time to play test these things. They barely have time to write them and edit them and lay them out. But you really put this through its paces so that it's, when it comes out, it should be like really solid out of the gate. What were some of the surprises that showed up during playtesting that you were like kind of surprised about, that you either changed or adjusted or added, or that you could discuss?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I will say, like, we playtested quite a bit. And like, to your point about it being challenging, though, like, there's a lot of content here, and it's funny, we playtest a long time. We playtested with a lot of people, but it's amazing how quickly it fragments out. Especially, we have 9 different radiant orders, 6 different heroic trees, and then we have an incredibly freeform advancement system, so you can kind of mix and match however you want. And like, you think, oh, we have hundreds and hundreds of playtest groups playing for months. Like, surely all of our content will get hit, right? And then you take an unpopular radiant order that nobody cares about and combine it with another heroic tree. All right, how many people played this character? 2. And like, it's so quickly, like, and so it's a huge challenge. In the end, we basically had to like assign people to certain parts of the game to make sure that we got full coverage. And
And
Anyway,
I'll definitely say that the ideals, especially the way we represented those, presented them, what powers you got the moment you swore the ideal, like what did you have to wait for after the goal, how do you access the ideals, that went through a lot of iteration. With very passionate fans telling us that it does not feel like it did in the books, to get us to where it now does feel like it does to swear an ideal in the books.
But to your original question about surprises, that one's trickier because, like, I don't know. I mean, this is a slight self-serving answer, but I was surprised at how much people just embraced the plot die right away.
Mm-hmm.
When we, so, you know, like to some earlier listener questions, there's some similarities here between this and stuff I worked on back in the day at FFG. And when we were doing these kind of mechanics, we got a lot of resistance. You know, we really had to do a lot of legwork to like convince people that this was an interesting way to role play around the table. And here, there was like almost none. People were like really embraced it, and our testers really embraced it, and like a large number of testers really embraced it. And so that surprised me a little because I kind of like was bracing for the same pushback we got, 10 plus years ago. But that just wasn't present. And like, I mean, it's a little obvious, I think, looking at it now, because like very clearly the industry has changed a lot since then. And like what people expect of their core resolution mechanics in role-playing games has changed a lot. And so this was just almost meeting expectations for what people expect to see in new systems nowadays. But I think just, you know, like my habits and instincts were bracing for one thing, and I didn't get that.
It's always good when the response is more positive than you were worried it was going to be.
Yeah,
I have to say that for having done a ton of playtests at this point, is that often there can be a little fire in playtests, but it's always good. But yes, I was actually worried that people wouldn't like this, and they like it.
Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of mechanics we destroyed and people didn't like. You know, there's plenty of things we gutted and pulled out and changed. Like, that's not to say those didn't exist, but that was probably the biggest surprise.
And I can say from my own personal experience, I joined the team probably 6, maybe 7 months after development had begun. And coming from a 5e background where a plot die was not a thing, I kind of came into it from the perspective of like, what is this thing? Why is it going to get in my way as a GM? Why would I want this? And then I played one session with it. I'm like, okay, I get it now. Like it really converts people very quickly with just how powerful of a storytelling tool it can be and how fun it is to use for the players.
I think that's actually just a change in role-playing games, is that, you know, the original role-playing game was obviously based on wargaming, and a lot of, if you look at 3.5 and 4, was still very much, you know, tactical war game with role-playing elements. But really, 5th edition, probably the biggest change is that the role-playing, especially when you see like these podcasts and, you know, Critical Role, it's like the storytelling has become central, and almost combat has become second or even tertiary to this. And you guys came along around a really good time in so many ways that this is really, you know, like the first thing I didn't look at the combat. You know, I was looking at the world building and your character building and the magic system. You know, it's like I looked at the combat, you know, 6th or 7th. You know, in the past that would be like the first thing I look at. And I think that's where maybe not so surprising is when people saw that die, the complications story die. It's like, yeah, because people are they're more interested now than I'd say even 10 years ago, and how they play these games are more for story and exploration of character. And I think that could explain it personally. So
yeah, definitely.
But well, I'll be happy to talk to you guys all day, but I imagine you guys have other things to do.
Yeah, we do probably. We have a small campaign to be answering questions on and stuff right now, so we should probably.
I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't worry about it.
I mean, we have Maddie. He's the one you'll see in the comments section. He's amazing. Like
he's killing it right now. Oh my goodness.
How many comics do you have? You only have 1,304. I mean, that's not so bad.
In 24 hours.
Yeah, I know, in one day. One person can handle that.
I mean, like, so he's routing questions to us and stuff, but like, it's still, we gotta, we probably need to get back to it. So we really appreciate you guys chatting with us. And,
thank you so much for having me as the second fiddle to Max Brook. But I hope I did him proud.
Oh, come on now. Max just really gets. Max is like nitty gritty kind of guy, and so like. Steven warned me that Mark might throw some like nitty gritty questions our way, and I was like, "Oh, Max is the guy for that." But he's stuck on the road right now.
I didn't realize we didn't have the right nitty gritty person to ask. I could have just avoided asking those.
No, it's fine.
You didn't even go that nitty gritty. You just won one nitty gritty.
I thought the one with the advantage
it was
and the
very
disadvantage
good.
was
You made up for
good
it.
Question, great question.
If you're gonna only ask one, you might as well ask like a really deep one. So that took 10 minutes to answer. So that was fine. You're like, so if we do this like weird combination, and I only get like this with that and this, it's like, how does that work exactly? I'm like, oh god, here we go. So, but yeah, obviously the Kickstarter is live now, and if you watch the videos, it looks like it's mostly ready to go. I mean, it's not like printing tomorrow, but it's like, when you say, oh, it's coming in 2025, it looks like it's going to come out in 2025. Like, you're going to get it next year.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
and
our
like,
fulfillment target is Q1 of 2025.
Lordy.
If you're curious to check out the game, you can go over to the Drive-Thru RPG. We have free PDFs of just our beta rules. It's not the full rules of the game, but it's like a good amount of them. And then you can head over to Demiplane, and that allows you to make characters, and a good chunk of our character creation content is there as well. So make sure to go check it out and give us send in feedback if you have it.
Yeah, you can download quite a bit from Drive-Thru. It has like sample characters, like 90 plus page rules and adventure. I was kind of surprised how much was there. I was like, oh wow, look, you can. It's not just like a demo rulebook. It was like a lot, so you can actually start playing it.
Like I said, we have a bunch more on Demiplane. So that's where all the character creation content is as well. So
you have access to all 15. No, not all 15 paths. Or is it?
No. The 6 heroic paths and Windrunner and Lightweaver. So you get Shallan and Kaladin, but you don't quite get all the Radiant orders yet.
But that means it doesn't have both of the orders for the adventure, the intro adventure, because there's Windrunner, Spren, and then there's, I forget the other one, but it's
the Will Shaper.
It's not a cryptic.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't. Is it a Peak Spren? I don't remember.
So like, Will Shaper is like Spren, aka Reacher.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. It's all right. They if you end up bonding that Spren, you're just gonna have to wait for the full rule book.
Yeah, we're DLCing the beta rules.
There you go.
Well, also, we have a Kickstarter, and that I moved to avoid yours coming. No, seriously, I did. I was like, I'm not going to go anywhere near that Kickstarter.
Well, ours
was
moved to avoid Words of Radiance, so...
well, there you go. But ours starts September 3rd, and that is Battlezoo Bestiary Elemental Storm, which you can check out now at Kickstarter.rollforcombat.com, and... If you like monsters, if you like monster hunting, if you like monster parts, if you like crafting systems, you like elemental spells, we got all that and more coming to you for Pathfinder and 5e. And we're even using the new 5e rules, because I have a whole stack of these like right next to me, and we're giving them out for free, by the way. I'm giving out 2 a week.
I tried to get a ticket at Gen Con for one and couldn't get it.
Really? I only have 10 next to me. I'm sorry.
Talk to you.
We can work out a trade. I'm sure this one's signed by Jeremy Crawford. I'm sure we can work out a trade. Maybe if I got one signed by Brandon.
Starlight Archive RPG signed by Brandon.
Yeah. I actually have a lot of things here signed by Brandon, but still. But okay, trade. Here we go. No, seriously, I have. You couldn't get a ticket? I got it all 4 days, my friend.
Did you really?
Yeah.
I don't like. I've always worked Gen Con, so I don't actually use their ticketing system that much. And like, I was like trying to add it to my cart, and then it's
I
like, no,
know.
you need to be like, it needs to be on your wish list, and then like it was like 2 after, and then I lost it.
I know. Well, I do websites. My day job is building Fortune 500 websites for a living. Because Derek was my friend. He's like, "How did you get on that?" It's like, "How did you get it 1 day, let alone 4?" I'm like, "Well, I'll tell you a secret. There were some hacks in the system they're not aware of. I'll leave it at that." So,
I see.
Delicious lies.
So I'm like, it's like my day job came very in handy. Oh, I got one here, and I got one here, and I got one here. And I got
Okay, all right. Now you're just showing off.
I got one here. You want one? Well, you need it for research, right? Research purposes.
That's true. It's coming out in like a month.
It's coming out in a month. You can wait a month, right? You're busy anyhow. You don't got time to play these games. So anyhow, no, but thanks so much. Oh, something like Stephen Hacker confirmed. I'm not a hacker. I am a developer that just knows tricks. There's a difference. But yeah, I can tell stories of my hacking days back in the day, but I won't. Anyhow, thanks so much for joining us. I was surprised you decided to join us. I was like, they're going to be pretty busy today, but obviously not busy enough.
It's also our job to do promotional stuff, so.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But yeah, this is great. We learned a lot, and as it continues to come out, I definitely want to have you guys on and learn more about it and talk more about the game, because I'm very excited to play this, because I definitely want to weave some storms there. There's not a lot of magic systems that I read that really excite me, and I was like, wow, this actually sounds awesome to actually play these characters. The only problem is everyone's going to be the wizard. All wizards.
Except Adeline. Adeline's not. I thought that was one of the best caster martial disparity, like psychological breakdowns of it in like fantasy fiction, of like how he came to grips with everybody else being a wizard except for him. I thought it was really cool.
So. And we've got that. So but I'm glad you're excited for it. So thank you guys for having us on.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. So everyone watching, until next time, if you want to battle the zoo, you have to roll for combat. Bye.
Bye.